We're always looking for the superstar, big tool, 80 runner or the 80 power guy, but they sometimes don't have that balanced portfolio, so to speak, of tool set. And Ben is one of them. If that power grade just ticks up a little bit, which we see a lot, if a guy can hit as well as he does and controls the zone as well as he does, the power always seems to play a little bit better than the scouts think. And we're hoping that can turn out to be what Ben's able to do, because it's such a balanced tool set and profile of everything he does. Probably the only tool that you might say might be a little below average is his pure power production. But I do think we're going to see a little bit more out of him as he gets a little more comfortable up there in the big leagues.
Seattle Mariners rookie third baseman Ben Williamson has been in the big leagues for less than a week, and yet he is already proving why he needs to be talked about as one of the best defenders in baseball. Today, I have on Mariners VP of Amateur Scouting Scott Hunter to talk through Ben Williamson, his recruiting process, the draft in 2023, and what the Mariners see internally from Ben. I'm also working on a player profile detailing Ben and his story, so make sure to be on the lookout for that one. And before we get into it, the sponsor for this podcast is Black Label Supplements. They're my go-to for all things supplementation, whether it's pre-workout, post-workout, creatine, you name it. You can visit blacklabelsupplements.com, use code CouchGM for 15% off your order. And if you or someone you know is thinking of buying, selling, or refinancing a property anywhere on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, or Arizona, I'm actually a mortgage broker when I'm not making these sports videos, and it's my goal to assist all sports fans and athletes in the Pacific Northwest to get into the home of their dreams. So whether you're a professional athlete or a couch GM, reach out to myself and I'd be happy to help. I'll have a link in the description of this video to get in contact if you'd like to start a pre-approval. And if you prefer a written version of my videos, I've actually teamed up recently with a company, Video to Blog AI, which I will now be using to convert all of my videos into blog posts. There will be a link in the description of this video to reach out and check out the blog as well. And with that, let's get into my interview with Scott Hunter. Awesome, Scott. Thanks for jumping on to talk all things Ben Williamson. The average fan has seen what he's done the past week, and you're like, okay, he's made some great plays at third base, but when you really understand where he's come from, the type of prospect that he is and what he's doing, and so quickly in the big leagues, it really makes you appreciate kind of the talent that he has and the ceiling that he has. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective, the journey of Ben Williamson from your perspective in the Mariners organization. So let's start with taking it back to when you guys first saw Ben Williamson, when he first jumped on your radar.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story because Ben was a senior sign, and it was kind of a unique situation of where, how aggressive we were in taking him, and I believe the second round of the 22 draft or 23 draft.
23. Yep.
23 draft. They all run together, but he was a passed over junior in the 22 draft because he always was a good player, always could defend, just didn't have a lot of power. And from my understanding, because our area scout Ty Hall did an amazing job, and everything we do starts with our guys in the field, just identifying players so we can discuss them come draft day. And Ty mentioned, he said he went into, after he didn't get drafted after his junior, he went into his coaching staff and said, what do I need to do if I want to play at the next level? And they basically told him, just get really strong. You're a good player. You just need to get stronger. And that's what he did. He went back to the offseason, gained 15 pounds, started coming out, hitting the ball a little harder. Next thing you know, he's a second round pick with us.
So when he's adding weight, did that also add to his arm strength and some of that, or was it mainly at the plate where they were looking to add the power?
I think a little bit of everything. I think his game just took up, just going through some old reports, everything just, stepped up a little bit. Like he always was a really good defender. Like even some of our guys thought he could play shortstop, might be a super utility in professional baseball. We even have a couple reports. They have a 70 grade defender on him at third base. So he's always been able to do that stuff. He's always been able to pick the baseball, throw it over to first base, do the highlight reel stuff. But I think the contact skills were always there at the plate, which really jumped off the page to us. But just getting stronger and impacting the baseball a little bit more to give him a chance to be an everyday player, which it's such a fun story because Ben's such a great kid, and it was such a funny draft day story when we took him and I called him. But it's exciting to see him do the things he's doing and help us. Since he's been up there, we've kind of got things rolling in the right direction.
Absolutely. So from a scouting perspective, how do you weigh, someone's defensive upside compared to their offensive upside? And how do you try to weigh those two things? And maybe you take a defensive first guy, or you're looking for more of an offensive first guy. How do you weigh those two things?
Yeah, I think we are all looking for the impact in the bat. I mean, that's where the high draft picks come from. If we're really convicted on them being able to drive in runs or do a lot of damage or do things at a very high level in the big leagues, I think power is part of our game right now. But guys like Ben, I think sometimes get overlooked. We call it, I don't want, this is not a derogatory statement, but it's like the boringly good college player that turns out to be a star in the big leagues. If you go through his reports, he could always defend, but pretty much on the major league, scale we use, the 20/80 scale, every box that you filled out was a 50. And being an average major league, defender, hitter, power is a really good player that sometimes turns out to be a superstar because they just get a tick better as they get into professional baseball. And I think that's where you look at Ben's background and you go, he's always been a really good player. He's always been a really good defender. If you can just squeeze a little bit more out of him, next thing you know, he's doing what he's doing in the big leagues.
So to clarify, he jumped on the Mariners' radar after his junior season. Is that correct?
After his junior season, but we didn't really think he was a draft where we thought he had to go back to college, and maybe as a senior we would make an investment in him. Usually those kind of kids get overlooked, especially if they don't get drafted their junior year, they go back as seniors. The old school scouts will say, "Wow, if he couldn't sign as a junior, why would you want him as a senior?" And that is an old school way of thinking that luckily we don't really buy into as an organization. We take every player for their story, their narrative. And his narrative was he decided, he needed to make a few adjustments with his body and get stronger. And he did.
And all he did his senior year was hit 391 with a 513 on base, a 662 slug. That's a 1.175 OPS. So at what point during his senior season did he really pop out to you guys like, hey, we need to take a deeper look at this guy and he's our guy?
Yeah, Ty Hullop in the regional meetings, when we come into Seattle, we do some old school meetings with all of our scouts, go through all their players, and he spoke very highly of Ben as a player, but also as a human being. So it really kind of like started coming to fruition at that meeting when we said, man, this guy sounds a little more interesting than just a normal senior sign. And then there's a big gap between when the college season's over until the draft, and he went up to Cape Cod to play. So then we sent one of our cross-checkers, Jesse Capellish, up to see him in Cape Cod, and he comes back with a really positive, feedback of, man, he's playing short. I wouldn't even rule out shortstop, and watching BP, there's maybe a little more power than we really think on our reports. And then you get into our national meetings, and one of our executives in the data world, Dave Cameron, says, God, this guy does some really unique things that a lot of baseball players don't. It's just the high contact. He doesn't swing and miss. He does a lot of interesting things. And when you start piecing that all together as a group, which I think our staff might, it's just, it impresses me every year, the amount of work that we put in and how it starts and how it ends, to be able to put all these little pieces of the puzzle together and come up with a decision to take Ben Williamson. We went from an area scout to a cross-checker to an analyst to guys in the room just saying, man, this guy sounds like it should be a Mariner. And next thing you know, we're taking him on draft day.
Yeah, that's amazing. So he did hit 394 in the Cape Cod League during his time in that summer 2023. Then walk me through that draft day experience. You mentioned there's a funny story, and that draft was unique because the Mariners ended up taking 3 high schoolers early on, which allowed you to go under slot with Ben Williamson. If you want to walk me through that funny story, kind of what it means to take a college senior under slot.
Yeah. We had a unique year that year with 3 first-round picks, and we went pretty aggressive. We paid a premium for those 3 high school players, and they're great kids and they're off to great starts to their career. So when you get deeper into that and you spend so much money at the top, you have to look for some value or how you want to run your draft pool. And we saw Ben as a day 2 guy where he'd probably go rounds 3, 4, 5. He was a really up and coming prospect that probably a lot of teams thought if they were going to take him, they can maybe cut a deal with him, save a little money. And we looked at it as, when we got to that point of spending so much money at the top, we said, let's not, just punt the next couple picks. Let's find somebody that we really believe in. And Ben's name just kept coming up. And when you start going into, calling his agent, and the agent said, where do you want to take him? I said, we're going to take him in the 2nd round, and this is what we would like to pay him. We're going to pay him a lot more than what he probably thought he was going to get out of this draft, and we're going to take him now. And the agent said, all right, let's do it. So every draft pick we get, I make a phone call to, and usually our high round pick, since there's a little more time in between each pick, I'll call on FaceTime. So I call Ben on FaceTime, and there's a delay with the TV and the actual pick. So when he picks up the phone, it's, he's on the East Coast, and it's, late at night, and he picks up the phone. And I don't know if he was in a closet. It was like the Blair Witch Project. He had a hoodie on. It was dark behind him. And he's like looking at me, wondering who I am.
So it was a FaceTime.
Yeah, it was the FaceTime. And I said, Ben, are you okay? Blink twice if you need help. Like, I made a joke with him. And I said, you haven't heard yet, have you? He goes, heard what? I said, your name's about to be called right now. And he looked at me like I was a little crazy. I said, you have family around? He goes, no, my parents are sleeping. Then when his name came across the TV, he just smiled at me. And I went, yeah, I think you're a Mariner, buddy. And like, I don't think he was really expecting to get drafted that early or on day one. But to this day, we laugh about it because when he got called to the big leagues, I texted him. I said, it's a long way from sitting in a dark room in the closet to the bright lights of the big city in Seattle.
That's amazing. So there wasn't a ton of communication prior to the draft to where you guys were like, hey, we're really interested in you. He just wasn't expecting it.
Oh, I think he knew that teams liked him and we liked him. Our scouts meet with every player, and we always have contact with the kids. But when it gets to that level, it's usually the agent we're involved with, and the agent's keeping the player very involved, up to date with what the offers are and stuff like that. And when I called the agent and told him what we were going to do, it didn't take very long for them to say yes, because we were very aggressive with Ben. And to take him in the second round, to see him go out, do what he's doing in a short matter of time, it makes us look very smart that we were aggressive on him. And he's done an excellent job of just representing what we do as an organization.
I want to go through the MLB current grading and get your thoughts on what your ratings might be. So currently MLB rates him at a 55 hit tool, a 40 power, 50 run, 55 arm, a 65 field, and an overall at 45. As you described, 50 is MLB average. What are your thoughts on those ratings right there? And you mentioned potentially a 70 fielding grade.
Yeah, we've had some big grades. I mean, we ranged from anywhere from like a 60 defender up to a 70 with some of our reports that I just went through this morning as an amateur. I think those grades are very accurate. And, as I started off with saying, sometimes these college players that when you put a lot of 50s in the boxes, the sum of the parts turns out to be pretty good. We're always looking for the superstar, big tool, 80 runner or the 80 power guy, but they sometimes don't have that balanced portfolio, so to speak, of tool set. And Ben is one of them. And if he's able to take that little bit of, and he's surprising, he's already, got his first home run in the big leagues. He's making a ton of contact. If that power grade just ticks up a little bit, which we see a lot, if a guy can hit as well as he does and controls the zone as well as he does, the power always seems to play a little bit better than the scouts think. And we're hoping that can turn out to be what Ben's able to do, because it's such a balanced tool set and profile of everything he does. Probably the only tool that you might say might be a little below average is his pure power production. But I do think we're going to see a little bit more out of him as he gets a little more comfortable up there in the big leagues.
I do think his bat is underrated, and we're seeing it already in the big leagues. Yesterday versus Liam Hendricks, he's working a 9-pitch at bat, and he swings at a slider down and out. A couple pitches later, he throws the same pitch and he lays off of it. So he's making the adjustments during the at bats, and he's showing that, yeah, he has a great ability to dominate the zone. Final question that I want to leave you with: what are your current MLB comps? If there's a player out there in the major leagues, who would you compare Ben Williamson to? I have a couple names, but I don't want to.
Wow, I haven't really thought about that in the history. If I think of plus defenders that were really good baseball players, I mean,
at third base,
who are you? Yeah, that's a tough question. I'd have to go look through the archives a little bit to really match them up.
The easy names for me that just, when you watch him play and you see the plays that he's making, it's Nolan Arenado and Matt Chapman. I went and
defensively, absolutely. Yeah.
I went and looked at Nolan Arenado's prospect rankings and coming up, and he was labeled a defensive liability at third base the year that he debuted. And now he's a perennial Gold Glover. Matt Chapman had a much higher prospect grade. He was a 75 arm, a 70 field. I think Ben Williamson is the next type of guy that has the upside to be a perennial Gold Glover, just objectively looking at the pure ability he has in the plays that he's made so far.
I'll take either one of those. That would be an unbelievable story for all of us, because, we do believe in Ben. We, as we said, those are great comps to have. Like, I probably would have thought maybe like going back in the day, like a young David Bell, was really a good player, played third base. The power was maybe like a 15 to 20 home run guy that could really play third base. But I like your two comps a little bit better, so we'll go with those.
I'm shooting for the moon. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome, Scott. Well, really appreciate your time. Best of luck this year, and yeah, we'll see who the Mariners can nag in this this next draft coming up.
Absolutely. We got to kind of keep the bus moving, keep the train moving with our prospects. So this is a great time to be a Mariner scout, so to speak.